So hi, my name is Tom. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Portis. And this talk is about how we build for the masses. So first, a little bit about Portis. Well, with Portis, we wanted to solve the problem, the challenge of letting the average person be able to use a decentralized application. If anyone here has ever tried to use a decentralized application, it's a very difficult process. You have to install something, you have to understand private keys, and it's a lot of friction that the average user simply won't stand for. So allow me to take you back to 2013. This was the time that Edward Snowden was releasing NSA papers. Everybody was under iPhone 5 and Snapchatting away and playing Flappy Birds. And all the offices across the world were doing their version of the Harlem Shake. Good times. At the same time, well, this thing called Bitcoin, which came around in 2009, started to gain a little bit of traction in tech forums around the world. That's around the time that I discovered it. And at the same time, a guy called Vitalik was carrying out the world's first ICO to help build this thing called Ethereum, which is much more than just this huge Excel file, but it's an actual computer that can do interesting computations and manage this global state that everybody can use. I was immediately hooked. I remember reading the white paper for the colored coins and seeing it's almost there, but it's not quite ready. And then when Ethereum came out, I was immediately interested in it. So we're going to move in time again to 2017. And on the picture on the right, you can see my co-founder, Itai. And we were working in a cybersecurity company called Watchdogs. And we took part in a Facebook hackathon that took place in Tel Aviv, in Israel. That's where I'm from, by the way. And we built a decentralized application. We used to organize meetups, just like this. This is why I knew we should connect a power outlet to make the screen work. And we had a problem with people clicking attend but not showing up. Anyone who ran a meetup knows that this is a big problem. And you don't want to charge people for money because it kind of defeats the purpose. So we created this application where the event organizer can create a deposit box. People who want to attend place a collateral into the smart contract. If they show up, they get it back. Otherwise, it goes to charity. Now, we won first place in the hackathon. People really liked it. And they approached us and saying, hey, we also run meetups. We want to use this. Well, at the time, the only solution out there was MetaMask, which means that I have a new user coming to my website, and the first thing they have to do is read a list of instructions. Now, that's not really good user experience. Blockchain is not a value proposition. Okay? People don't care about blockchain. They shouldn't care about blockchain. Most users are not tech savvy. They don't understand the underlying architecture. And just like when they're using regular Web 2 applications, when you're using Uber, you don't understand TCP/IP. You just understand that this works, this does something good for you, and you want to use it. So this list of instructions that we're giving DApps is not a way to go. And like I said before, Uber doesn't have that list of instructions. Instagram doesn't have it. Neither should regular Web 3 applications. We have to move forward, not backwards. The experience the user needs to have must be simple. It has to be something which is easy to use. And I want to use an example. This is Super Mario. We're going back to the 80s now. And this is a great example of good user experience. You're looking at this stage, and today when you're playing games, you have oh, you want to do this, press X. You want to do that, press the circle, and they explain each and every step. This had no explanation, and somehow we all got through it. You understood right away that you can't go back left. They placed that small Goomba there to give you a little bit of friction, a little bit of challenge to understand it. You got to jump on it to kill it. Originally, by the way, it was supposed to be that turtle, but they decided, no, that's too complicated. We want to have only one jump, so they understand it. And then you see those squares with the question marks on them. You're, oh, that's interesting. Then that mushroom comes out, you grow bigger. And this first step of your application was a great way to understand how this whole game works. And you can use the entire game. And you didn't have to tell the user anything. No pop-ups explaining stuff and walk me through stuff. And it was just simple, and it worked. And the same way with Web3. It has to be a simple And you have to make sure your users don't have to work hard. Now, there are inherent things in blockchain that we can't ignore, which is the private key. That's the only kind of leap of understanding that your user will have to do, which is to understand that they have something called a private key and it's theirs. But besides that part, everything else should be just as easy. On the flip side of those games in the 80s, you had games like these. If whoever recognizes them, that's Battletoads and Contra, and they're notoriously known as really, really difficult games. Now, the reason this happened is that the people who built those games, there were developers and testers who were really good gamers. They were playing nonstop, and they, in a sense, assumed that the people who are going to play this, they're just as good. They're just going to understand, going to be great at it and really fast. And I think you can see the analogy when we're talking about DApp developers. A lot of them are very technical people. They're very smart. They're very tech savvy. And they sometimes lose sight of the fact that their users are not. And they're not going to, go through that extra effort just to use your application. Now, we're trying to replace legacy systems. We're trying to replace, the systems that are in place, and we're doing that with UI, which is worse. Good luck. It's going to be a challenge. So when Itai and I faced this issue, back in 2017, we were both developers. And it kind of, we were kind of banging our heads, like, how can this be? How come there isn't a better solution for developers out there to take the burden off the users, and maybe place it on the developers? But bottom line, we're used to those kind of solutions in the Web 2 world. So why shouldn't we have them in Web 3? So we released Portis, that I mentioned before, which is the SDK that your users have, that your developers have. Now, the idea is that we don't ask the user to do anything besides create an account and log in. We don't give them go and install this thing, understand these concepts, go to an exchange, buy some crypto, come back to us. And since we released our SDK a year ago, we have around 500 developers which have signed up to use to try it out, and over 25 DApps that are in production using us. Now, we talk to these DApps because we need them to integrate us, as opposed to the other solutions which assume the user will go through that trouble of installing a Web3 provider on their phone, on their desktop. We have this relationship with the DApps, and we get a lot of useful feedback. And we hear from them what are their individual pain points, what difficulties are they facing, and we offer them solutions. For example, Raddy cards, which is a way for people to buy NFTs for charity. So we wanted to offer them a way of easily doing that in a conference and like as a giveaway. So we teamed up with Volca, which allow you to do airdrops to users and give them a little bit of ether inside their new wallet. But we did it in a way which a user in the street just scans a QR code, clicks next a couple of times, and they have that ether in their wallet and they can buy a Raddy card with it. So the experience is really simple. If we're talking about white labeling, this is like a very interesting subject that we're dealing with, because we want to make sure that our users face as little friction as possible. Well, it's not our users. It is our users, but it's the DApps users. And if they see Portis really big, when they're using CryptoKitties, they click on to do something, and they're not a power user. They didn't install something in advance. They're using CryptoKitties as far as they're concerned. So if they see a huge Portis logo, it throws them off. They're like, okay, what's this? So we minimize our presence in the login screen, in the register screens, because, well, that's what the DApps wanted. And, we got to accommodate for that, because they're talking to the users, they're giving us back that feedback, and we want to make sure they're able to offer the best experience to their users. It's also a lot of various user experience improvements. If it's the different language here and there, if it's down to where the button is and where the checkbox is. But a lot of those small stuff put together are what makes the difference between a really good experience and a clunky experience, which will make the user to just say, oh, you know what, never mind. So the first friction point, and we saw that as a huge friction point that we got rid of, is asking the user to install something. Okay? We give and also for the developers, we wanted to make it simple. So integrating Portis is simply those couple lines of code. If we're talking about Ethereum, so you get a Web3 solution, just like when you have MetaMask on the user's device, but you didn't ask the user to install MetaMask. Now, the way Portis works behind the scenes is that we use end-to-end encryption. So when a user creates their wallet inside the browser, they have this solution bundled in, so they didn't have to install anything, but they're fully custodians of their private key. Because when they create their wallet, they encrypt it on their device using their password, which never leaves that device. Nobody knows that password besides us. Now that throws us back to what I mentioned before. This is something that we do have to educate users on, which is if you don't have your secret, if it's not your password or your device, if you're using another solution, then once that service gets hacked or is malicious, then you'll lose everything and there's no going back. So we don't want to go down that easy solution of saying, oh, I'll keep your private key for you, because we're kind of defeating the purpose here. So as I mentioned before, asking the dApps to integrate us is a challenge, but it also adds a lot of value because we get all that useful feedback from them. And our approach in general is to give them what they want, so we can actually reach mainstream adoption. So installation was the first challenge we had to get rid of. We don't want to ask people to install something before they even started using your application, because most users, your dApp is going to be the first decentralized application they're using ever, and putting that friction of asking to install something, that's a pretty big challenge. But the bigger challenges out there are the private key management and the network fees. These are, I personally believe, these are the biggest issues to tackle when you're talking about a dApp wallet. Now, as for private key management, you basically have three options. Either it's on the server, we're custodian style Coinbase, we'll keep it for you. The other alternative is it's on your device, like MetaMask. It's stored there. Problem is, if you lose your device, and most people won't bother to write down their 12 words or 24 words, then it's gone forever. And if you want to use it on different devices, that also provides a challenge, because people are used to that cloud experience. So telling them, you got to write down those 12 words, then import them manually into a new device. And I don't know about you, I'm a pretty technical person. I also get a little bit scared when I have to start doing stuff like that. Maybe I'm scared because I understand the implication. Maybe a person who isn't as strong won't be, but from my experience, they're also pretty intimidated by that. The third option is what we do with Portis, which I mentioned, that is the end-to-end encryption, which is we encrypt it on the device, we store the encrypted wallet on our servers, so the user gets that cloud experience and can access it on each one of their devices. So we send them back the encrypted wallet, let's say on their phone, they decrypt it, they can sign transactions. Now they go on their desktop, they get back the encrypted wallet, they decrypt it using their password that only they know, and then they can sign transactions. Now granted, if they lose that password and they didn't write down the recovery phrase, that's the equivalent of losing your device. But I'll get later on to how we're aiming to solve that as well. Now, network fees. Network fees are interesting. If we're talking about side chains, they might be very low. But even if they're very low, the difference between 1 cent and free is not 1 cent. To get that 1 cent, that's a huge gap that the user has to overcome. Now, when we started off, we gave each new user $1 for free. Now, that wasn't really scalable. It was just because we felt that we want to give people the option to take the dApp out for a test drive. So we're giving them a little bit of gas in their tank. But it's not scalable. It was a very quick hack. But moving forward, we recently integrated with the gas station network, which is using meta transactions to allow dApp owners to sponsor gas fees for their users. Now, tomorrow I'm giving a talk at the America Hall, I think it's called, at 1:50, and I'm going to dive a little bit more deeply into how the gas station network works. But in general, it allows the dApp owner to sponsor gas fees for their users. So if we get rid of that problem and we don't ask the user to install anything, then we're starting to get a pretty good UI. But that's not enough. What else can we do? So around, I think, 7-8 months ago, we got approached by the POA network. And not about the POA network, I'm sorry, but a game called DApps, which runs on the POA network. And they saw Portis, and they really loved it, but they wanted us to support the POA network so it could run their game. Now, the POA network is Ethereum, it's an EVM blockchain. So it wasn't that difficult for us to integrate it, but that led us to understanding a more interesting problem. So we added support for POA. And then up until that point, the way that that game explained to its user what they have to do is they have to install MetaMask, and they have to go and set a custom RPC node inside MetaMask to speak with POA because it's EVM compatible. It works. But showing this to your users and asking them to do that only works for people in this conference or technical people. You can't reach mainstream adoption that way. So we added more blockchains, but that's pretty simple. But what about when you want to use multiple blockchains at the same time? One of the dApps using us is called Auctionity. Now, Auctionity does actual live auctions of NFTs. And it's a very interesting dApp because just like any other auction house, you have the person running the auction and the one publicizing it, and they all get a cut, and it's all decentralized. But the bidding has to be cheap. When I say cheap, I mean free, and it has to be fast. So they're using their own private network. Now, it's still a blockchain, so everybody can validate the transaction, see that their bids went through, and nobody cheated them, but it doesn't cost them anything. But the NFT themselves, well, they're meaningless on their private network. You want the NFT, you want that CryptoKitty on the public blockchain that everybody agrees upon. So you need your users to be using two different blockchains at the same time. So we listened to them, and we created something. We added a feature in our Portis SDK called Change Network, which allows the developer to change the network for the user. Now, when the user is signing the transaction, there's a small window showing which network you're on. So you can't really cheat them and change anything without their knowledge. But we're letting the dApp provide an easier experience for their user. Now, you might say, OK, but maybe I don't trust the dApp. Maybe it's acting in a malicious way, which brings me to my next point, that we got to rebuild the trust between the dApps and the users. Now, again, this is blockchain. This is decentralization. Nobody trusts nobody. Okay? But you're not necessarily using the Silk Road. You might be using a dApp that you trust, just like any other Web2 application that you're using. So just like when you go to an ice cream vendor on the street and you feel comfortable buying an ice cream, even though it might be poisoned, you have some sort of relationship with that place. And at some point you can say, look, I trust you. I'm not afraid that you're malicious. So we added something called Trust This App that allows the users to say, look, I trust this application. You can do it when you confirm the action. You just toggle something on. And from that moment on, as long as it's a non-payable function, which means you're not directly paying Ether from your wallet, you're just signing a transaction, you don't have to confirm it. You confirmed it when you clicked approve inside the application. You don't need to have this and this and this. I mean, nobody's actually verifying. I wouldn't say nobody. But I went around DevCon and I asked people who are very technical, I said, OK, guys, who seriously here verifies the transaction data whenever they sign something on MetaMask? And I got answers from a lot of people, which is, no, I don't. So why are we bothering users with this terrible UI? If they don't trust the app, they don't have to say that they trust it. But if they do, give them the opportunity to trust it. Give them the opportunity to say, OK, this application is OK. And just like I'm letting it change my network, I trust it, and I want to be able to have, the experience we all know from Web 2. Now, this does raise a couple of questions. Okay, there are side effects to transactions. Okay, that just because a function isn't payable doesn't mean it couldn't end up with you moving a lot of tokens from your wallet to something else because you're voting on something which will move tokens from that ERC20 contract somewhere else. Now, we're working with dApps to figure out how we can find the right balance between usability and security, allowing them maybe to flag dangerous functions. Because there's a question here which is interesting, like how do you know what's going to be the side effect of that function? But we have a lot of use cases. For instance, the bidding that I talked about in Auctionity, you don't want to have a window popping up that you have to confirm every time. You just want to click bid and it goes through because you're using the application and you agree to it when you click bid inside the application. So users don't care about blockchain, and they also don't care which blockchain. I mean, they really don't. It's like saying, oh, you're using TCP. No, I only want to use UDP. It should be simple. So I mentioned all the various EVM compatible blockchains that we're supporting. We recently added a beta support for EOS and for Bitcoin. We're going to be supporting more blockchains soon. And we see this as a value that we're not only providing the users, but also the developers. Because you might want to have a DApp which is using one blockchain for one thing, one blockchain for another, or maybe you want to have it on multiple blockchains for whatever reason it is, but we just want to open up as many possibilities as possible. Now, right now we're using, so there's also the question of the nodes themselves. So when you set up a Portis on your DApp, you can use your private node, you can use Infura, and we're also integrated with Pocket, which is sort of decentralized Infura, which is very interesting, and I recommend looking into. So what's next? So I mentioned account recovery, that if you forget your password, then it's gone forever. So we're looking into additional account recovery mechanisms. If it's offering a social recovery that allows the user to kind of, ask a friend to help him recover his private key. And we believe, by the way, that 3 out of 5 people, that's overkill. Like, when you get an apartment you get an extra key for your apartment, you don't split it up into 5 pieces. Like, if it's your brother, if it's a very good friend, now he can't just run away with your private key. We had some protection in place where you have to verify it in your email. I know email is not completely safe, but it's that, it's that balance between usability and security that we're looking for. So if it's your good friend and he also needs to hack into your email, and if you have that much, value and you're that afraid of what's going on, then okay, don't use that feature. Another feature that we're even considering doing is letting you even back it up to a centralized OAuth service if you want to. It's not necessarily one solution that fits everybody. So we just want to give everybody the options that fits them. And more SDKs. Right now it's the web SDK, but we're working on a native mobile SDK. We're talking about Unity SDKs and protocol support. So if those numbers don't mean a lot for you guys, so 1337, that's the Groundhog network. That's for subscriptions. So that allows you to just pay a monthly subscription, weekly, whatever, to an artist you like, a game that wants to operate like that. And 1613, so we're working with them about integrating them. 1613, that's the gas station network that I mentioned. It's already integrated, it's already live. Well, the gas station network goes live on mainnet by the end of this month, hopefully. Right now it's being audited in all different directions by OpenZeppelin. And it's running on Ropsten at the moment. And so it's EAP 1613. They're doing a little bit of modification, so obviously we're going to stay up to date on that. FIO, which is the foundation for inter-wallet operability that allows sending it basically metadata on top of transactions to make sure that you can be certain that you're sending, just give some sort of security to the user, that they're sending it to the right place. They can even take it back if they want to, if the other person agrees to that kind of configuration, and a lot of other interesting ways. Multiple blockchains, and they're working with different wallets to incorporate that. And unstoppable domain, which is like ENS on all blockchains. So like DNS, but for Ethereum, which is ENS. So you have a name, you have an address for your wallet, but that applies to Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, whatever blockchain you want. So we're also working with them to integrate them into our system. And user experience, just keep on improving it. It be data-driven, be dev-driven. If it's adding custom gas price, if it's adding universal two-factor authentication. We have two-factor authentication, but we got some requests to use the YubiKey. If it's hardware wallet integration. And if it's just different customization, more white labeling, more direct purchase flows. We allow users to purchase through wire direct to their wallet, so improving that flow and just getting the feedback from the devs, from the data, and providing the best user experience we can. So we'll keep listening to the developers and build out a platform that solves all of those challenges. And we just want to make sure that they can focus on building their smart contracts and not worry about the non-technical users, and just use Portis and have a solution that takes care of all of those issues that they shouldn't be needing to focus on. And that's it.
Does anyone have any questions?
Do you have time for questions?
Bring up questions? Great.
Anybody? Okay.
Business model.
Well, business model is, I mentioned that we allow users to buy Ethereum through us. We do that through a third party. So we have a rev sharing model with them. So they take a small percentage. We take a small percentage of that. And also down the line, right now, we realize that most dApps are, they're starting out, they're very simple, but we do see ourselves offering them more premium services that they will need for a monthly fee or for a per usage fee, if it's their own private nodes that we will set up, if it's more advanced analytics data, and other kind of premium services that we're thinking to offer them.
But currently it's a bit depressing that everything that's user-facing needs to piggyback on the business model of someone else.
Well,
By using.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, you live from affiliate fees now.
Well, when we allow them to onboard from fiat to crypto. So, you pay a fee to the provider that does that. So we also take a small fee for that, for offering the service. I think that's fair. But if we're talking long term as well, besides the users, because if we imagine for a second that we're 10 years into the future and fiat is a thing of the past, although I think that'll take much longer than that, but let's say 20 years, whatever. So that's no longer a business model, right? Because people don't need to do the on-ramp. So we believe that the applications themselves, just like when an application, those applications are still in the way we believe it, they're still going to have mom and dad, so to speak. There's still going to be a company which has maybe a lot of those tokens that they created a token economy, and that allows them to keep building the product. But someone has to build a product. The belief that we can get really good mainstream products that are completely open source, I think so far it has proven that this is not the case. If you're looking into Web 2, there aren't many good Web 2 applications that are completely open source. Usually you use open source components, but you need good user experience, you need good product, you need good marketing to get those in the hands of the average user. So in a sense, like you have Web 2 services today that companies are paying for. If it's services like Twilio, something of the sort, then it makes sense that if they get a good enough product that helps them and saves them effort and offers them something that, sure, you can build it yourself, but you can say that pretty much for every SaaS model out there. So, yes?
Have you heard feedback from developers who might integrate with you guys that they essentially are worried about the way that you store the private key? Like that they essentially, it's like a deal breaker for them.
Yeah. We heard that before, so we listened. And so we didn't want to just release everything open source completely for more business reasons. Technically it is open source in the sense that it runs in the browser. So if you're very much inclined, you can go and do the reverse engineering. But we do understand the concerns. So in about a week or two, we're going to be releasing our white paper, which will lay out the entire end-to-end encryption architecture in terms of how the encryption itself works. Like, what do we do with the private key, how we encrypt it, how we send it to the server. All of that will be laid out there. So we're just giving it the final run through and making sure it's nice and clean.
I guess I think my worry is, or my question is, like, I would assume that 90% of people or something would not be okay with that, but the fact that you're pursuing it makes me think a lot of people are actually okay with it.
Yeah. You're talking about the developers themselves.
The developers,
Yeah, well, look, I always tell people, if you have $1 million, don't use MetaMask, don't use Portis, don't use anything that has so many attack vectors like a phone or a desktop, use a hardware wallet. But what about the fact that you want to use the hardware wallet for your $1 million, but you want to have a hot wallet out of those million of $1,000, $10,000, and there's always going to be a trade-off between usability and security. Now, if you're talking about the fact, like if there's a problem with our encryption, well, that's why we're releasing the white paper. That's why we want to be open about it. And so, but yeah, it's not going to be the same as, it's all a matter of how big your tinfoil hat is, So you can even hardware wallet, you see like, no, maybe the mailman took it in the outside and added something to my hardware. So I'll just use dice to generate something. Yeah, of course. But yeah, it's a valid concern. Like,
Would you ever think of making an option either for the developer or the user to say, you know what, it's on me. If I lose it, I'm screwed. Don't send it back to the server.
So yes. So one of the things that we get asked sometimes is, what about IPFS? Why not save the private key to IPFS? Now, right now, we're kind of saving the average user from themselves. Because on IPFS, if you chose a password which is very weak, a dictionary attack will be able to decrypt it. Although we are using PBKDF2 and ASCBC and all the standard way of doing end-to-end encryption, it's still something that can be done. So we can prevent brute force because we're kind of safeguarding it. After 5 attempts, now we locked it down, we send you an email, click on it, open up. Obviously, if someone hacked your email as well, then yeah, you're a really big target, and I don't know, you should probably start questioning what's happening in your life. But, but in general, we want to offer that later on. We want to offer the user the power to say, hey, I want to use IPFS. Or you know what? I just want to store it myself. And once we actually release the white paper, we're hoping that at some point we will feel comfortable about open sourcing everything, which means that we will let you actually, you could decrypt it yourself back and you will know exactly how the whole architecture works and you can do it yourself. Right now, we're really focusing on the average person. I think they're kind of getting neglected a bit. And if we want to reach mainstream adoption, we're focusing on making sure that they can easily buy crypto, that they have a very good user experience, they have that change network, trust this app, a lot of stuff that will just make them a little bit scared. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, exactly. But we completely agree. That stuff we want to offer as well. The power users shouldn't be neglected. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much and have a great day.